They painted their faces with poison. They bleached their hair with urine and burned their skin with vinegar and lead. To be beautiful in the Renaissance wasn't just painful, it was deadly. And yet, for a woman in Florence, Venice, or Rome, it wasn't optional. Because beauty wasn't vanity, it was survival. Tonight, we travel to a world gilded in light and shadow, the Renaissance, a time remembered for art, genius, and rebirth. But beneath the paintings and marble statues lies a quieter, more tragic truth, the story of how beauty itself became a form of suffering. So, dim the lights, let your breathing slow, and imagine yourself waking up in the 16th century, somewhere in Italy. The room is cold, not the crisp, refreshing kind of cold that wakes you up, but the kind that seeps into the bones of stone walls and lingers in the air. A single candle flickers on a wooden table, throwing pale light across uneven plaster. You lie beneath a coarse linen sheet, the scent of smoke and wax mingling faintly with something sour, vinegar perhaps, or the residue of yesterday's beauty water. Outside, the bells of a nearby church toll softly, summoning the city to prayer. You rise slowly, bare feet touching the chilled floor. There's no mirror yet. Not the kind you know. Polished metal or blown glass reflects only a distorted ghost of your face. And that face, by the standards of your time, must appear pure, pale as alabaster, smooth as marble, untouched by the blemishes that marked you as mortal. In the Renaissance, beauty was not a luxury. It was proof of moral worth, of divine favor, of social standing. A clear porcelain complexion signified purity, chastity, and wealth, the traits every respectable woman was meant to embody. But achieving that look was an exhausting, lifelong ritual. You begin by washing your face with a mixture of vinegar and rose water, sharp, stinging, meant to strip the skin clean. If you can afford it, you add a few drops of mercury, believing it refines the complexion. If not, you make do with what's available. Ashes, crushed eggshells, maybe a paste of lead oxide. The smell is metallic, faintly sweet, and nauseating if inhaled for too long. No one tells you it's toxic. No one knows it kills slowly. Women spend hours before dawn preparing their faces before stepping outside. They rubbed ointments meant to smooth wrinkles, whiten the skin, and hide freckles, each ingredient a gamble between beauty and decay. Lead carbonate, in particular, was adored. It gave the skin a ghostly pallor, the fashion of angels and noble ladies alike. But the more you used it, the grayer your skin became. Your teeth darkened, your hair thinned, and still, you used more. You can imagine the irony. The Renaissance, the era of enlightenment and rediscovery, also gave rise to some of the most harmful beauty practices in history. Doctors and apothecaries, half scientists and half alchemists, sold miracle tonics promising to preserve youth. Most were cocktails of arsenic, vinegar, and herbs. They didn't preserve anything except profit. For the average woman, beauty rituals were both aspiration and burden. Peasant women, working in fields or over smoky hearths, couldn't maintain the same pale elegance as noble ladies. Their skin darkened under the sun, their hands roughened with labor. And yet, even among the poor, the ideal of fairness persisted. Many resorted to dangerous bleaching concoctions or wrapped their faces in cloths, soaked with vinegar to lighten the skin, a practice that left burns and scars. Imagine the daily monotony of it. Every morning, you reapply the same paste, knowing it makes you sick but terrified of being seen without it. Your reflection becomes a mask, a symbol of control in a world where women had very little of it. The Renaissance woman's toilette was a ceremony of contradictions. It promised empowerment through beauty, but demanded obedience to impossible standards. Men wrote the rules, Painters immortalized them, and women lived and often died by them. You can almost hear the creak of the wooden chair as she sits before her mirror. Her maid approaches with a basin of tepid water and a small brush. They speak quietly, the soft scrape of bristles against skin filling the silence. The air smells faintly of lavender honey and the underlying sharpness of metal. She winces as the mixture touches her cheek, not from vanity, but from duty. Makeup wasn't decoration. It was reputation. In a society where a woman's worth was tied to appearance, an unpainted face could ruin prospects as surely as scandal. And so they persisted. Layer after layer, ritual after ritual, until the line between face and facade disappeared. Hair, too, demanded attention. The perfect blonde was coveted, golden like the Virgin in paintings. Women bleached their hair by sitting for hours under the sun, their heads wrapped in linen soaked with lye or even pigeon droppings. The stench was unbearable. The burns were worse. But when the cloths came off and the sunlight caught their hair just right, it gleamed briefly like spun gold. Even the eyebrows had rules. Word of mouth. A high forehead was the height of elegance. To achieve it, women plucked or shaved away the hairline entirely, creating smooth domed brows that resembled classical sculptures. It gave an ethereal look and headaches from exposed skin and constant irritation. Imagine your reflection after such effort. The pale, almost translucent face, the faintly trembling lips tinted with crushed berries or cochineal dye. The heavy scent of perfume meant to mask the smell of rancid oils and smoke. To modern eyes, it might look haunting, but to them, it was divine. Behind this obsession was a deeper cultural current, one born from religion and art. Paleness wasn't just fashion, it was morality made visible. Dark skin implied labor, exposure, and impurity. To be white as marble was to be closer to the ideal. The saints, the Madonnas, the muses painted by men like Botticelli and Raphael. The cruelest part was that many women genuinely believed beauty equaled virtue. And they endured whatever pain or sickness it brought, convinced it reflected the purity of their souls. Every rash, every fainting spell, every strange fever was simply the price of grace. There's something quietly tragic in that. In the small wooden rooms of Florence and Venice, countless women mixed their potions by candlelight, tiny chemists in corsets, experimenting with substances no one fully understood. They weren't foolish. They were following the rules of a world that demanded perfection from bodies designed to fail. Now imagine yourself among them. The candle flickers. The mirror distorts your features into an unfamiliar mask. You smell of roses and lead. Outside, the city hums. Merchants shouting, bells ringing, the faint music of a lute drifting from a nearby courtyard. It's a world of beauty and poison intertwined, each indistinguishable from the other. And somewhere in that faint glow, you realize the truth. The Renaissance may have given birth to art, but it also birthed an illusion that to be beautiful was to be good. And that illusion, painted on faces and passed through generations, would prove far harder to wash away than any lead paste. The morning passes slowly. Sunlight creeps across the floor, illuminating dust in the air, fine, glittering particles that make the small room look almost holy. But this isn't luxury. It's residue. Powders, crushed stones, bits of chalk, tiny flecks of lead that have settled into every corner. When you breathe, they enter your lungs unnoticed. When you eat, they cling to your hands. Little by little, beauty seeps inward. Hygiene, in the Renaissance, was a delicate subject. Bathing the entire body was considered risky, something that opened the pores and invited disease. Doctors advised moderation, wash the face, the hands, perhaps the feet, but keep the rest safely covered. Instead, Scent became a substitute for cleanliness. Perfume was not an accessory, it was armor. You dab a bit of it behind your ear, something distilled from crushed flowers, vinegar, and musk. It masks the musty air of stone rooms and the faint rot of stagnant canals. If you're wealthy, you might own a pomander, a small metal sphere filled with spices or ambergris tied to your belt. It swings as you walk, releasing its fragrance like a protective charm. The poor must make do with herbs tucked into pockets or sewn into sleeves, a faint reminder of gardens they no longer have time to tend. Clothing, too, plays its part in this quiet theater of presentation. Your garments are layered, linen against the skin, then wool or silk, and above that, perhaps velvet if you can afford it. Corsets are not yet the bone-crushing cages of later centuries, but they still shape the body, cinching the waist and lifting the bust. Everything must suggest grace. Even breathing must be beautiful. Imagine the effort it takes to maintain such poise in the heat of summer, the air thick with smoke from hearths, and the reek of refuse in narrow streets. Laundry is done rarely. Fabrics absorb sweat and perfume alike, becoming part of the body's scent. When noble women change their gowns daily, it's not for cleanliness, but display a performance of abundance. Every color, every fold of fabric speaks of status, and every stitch was likely done by hands that will never wear it. If you are of the upper class, your maid tends to your hair while you sit motionless, eyes half-lidded with fatigue. She combs perfumed oil through it, olive oil infused with rosemary or clove to keep it shining. If you are poor, you use lard. Either way, the result is heavy, and the smell lingers long after you leave the room. It's easy to romanticize the Renaissance as an age of beauty, but the truth is quieter and heavier. The air inside homes was thick with smoke from cooking fires and candle soot. Windows were small, glass expensive, light scarce, the mirrors distorted, the pigments poisonous, the fabrics rough. And yet, amid all this discomfort, people created worlds of color and form so exquisite they still dazzle us centuries later. That's the paradox that defines this era. Perfection was born from imperfection. The discomfort of daily life pushed people toward art, ritual, and ornament, small rebellions against decay. Even cleanliness, though misunderstood, became an act of devotion. Rubbing the skin with cloth soaked in wine was said to refresh the blood. Brushing the teeth with burnt salt and honey kept the breath sweet as lilies. It didn't, of course, but the illusion mattered. And perhaps that's the thread that runs through every act of beauty, the quiet wish to appear untouched by the world, even while it wears you down. Step outside for a moment. The street smells of bread and sewage, of damp stone and horse dung. Women walk quickly, their skirts brushing filth, their veils hiding faces half powdered, half sweating beneath the sun. They avoid eye contact with men loitering by taverns. Every movement is practiced, the bow of the head, the measured gait, the folded hands, because even modesty was a form of beauty. To be seen as virtuous was as valuable as being seen at all. You might notice the contrast between public and private life. Inside the home, the beauty ritual is intimate, almost sacred. Outside, it becomes armor. The painted face concealing exhaustion, the faint smile concealing fear. A woman's reflection was her reputation, and reputation was currency. Occasionally, someone refuses the game. A widow who lets her hair go gray. A midwife who works with her sleeves rolled up, skin browned by years of labor. They are whispered about, admired by some, pitied by others. To be plain was to be free, but freedom had a cost. Meanwhile, in palaces and merchant houses, beauty becomes a profession. Recipes for creams and powders are traded like secrets. Apothecaries mix them in back rooms, labeling jars with poetic names, water of angels, Venetian white. Each promises youth, grace, perfection. Each carries the faint smell of death beneath the roses. And yet, there's tenderness here too. The gentle patience of the maid who applies the paste without question. The quiet pride of a mother teaching her daughter how to shape her brows, how to hold her face in the presence of strangers. Generations passing down rituals that outlive their meaning, not because they were wise, but because they made the world feel a little more orderly. Imagine for a moment how different our own rituals truly are. We still wake each morning to the same soft tyranny of mirrors. We still measure worth in reflection. Only the ingredients have changed. No more lead, no more vinegar and ash, but the same longing remains. By now the sun has set again. The candle burns lower, its wick curling inward like a dying flower. Your face feels stiff beneath its layers of powder. You remove it carefully with oil, watching as the cloth darkens. For a brief moment you glimpse your bare skin, pale, fragile, human. And you realize that every woman of this time, no matter her class, must have felt that same small moment of honesty between the day's mask and the night's rest. The city grows quiet. Somewhere, a church bell tolls the hour. The air smells of extinguished candles and distant rain. You lie down again on the coarse linen, your skin tingling faintly from whatever the paste has left behind. And before sleep takes you, one last thought lingers. That beauty in this age was not merely seen, it was suffered. Sleep doesn't come easily. The faint sting of vinegar still clings to your skin, and somewhere in the distance, a carriage wheel grinds over cobblestone. You hear footsteps in the corridor outside. The soft shuffle of servants cleaning the ashes from the hearth. Before dawn, the world begins again, and so does the ritual. The next morning smells faintly of lavender, smoke, and human closeness. You sit upright, as light filters through the shutters in thin, dusty rays. The mirror awaits. Even before breakfast, your hands move automatically. The brush, the cloth, the bowl of cloudy water. This is not vanity. This is duty performed in silence. If you are fortunate, you might own a small box lined with velvet, filled with jars of powder and perfume. Each one labeled in careful script. Cerussa for the face, Acqua di Gioventù for the skin, Olio di Mandorli for the hair. The jars are beautiful objects, smooth glass or porcelain. Their contents lethal in slow increments. But beauty in the Renaissance is a kind of devotion, a prayer said with paint and powder instead of words. Perfume, especially, becomes its own kind of language. A woman's scent could define her more than her voice. Ambergris and rose for nobility. Myrrh and violet for those who could only dream of such luxury. It hides the odor of the body, the stillness of air trapped behind tapestries, the faint rot of water that has stood too long in its basin. The world smelled thick of humanity, of candle smoke, of something always on the edge of decay. And so they drowned it all in sweetness. When you walk through a Renaissance city, the scent changes with every street. Near the apothecary, it's sharp with alcohol and herbs. Near the butcher's, metallic and heavy. Near the convent walls, faintly of beeswax and crushed lavender. Everywhere, the clash of beauty and rot. You can almost taste it in the air. Even jewelry held its secret rituals. Rings filled with perfume. Lockets containing tiny sponges soaked in aromatic oils. Some wore necklaces of coral to protect the skin, or pendants carved from ivory, believed to cool the blood. Others hid tiny bits of arsenic inside ornamental capsules to be taken in secret, just enough to keep the cheeks faintly flushed. The boundary between adornment and medicine blurred until no one could tell where the cure ended and the poison began. Afternoon brings another layer of performance. The visit, the market, the walk along the square. Your gown is heavy, its sleeves embroidered with gold thread that glints in the sunlight. Every movement must be deliberate, slow, graceful, calculated. Even the act of turning your head reveals the fine line of your neck, powdered to perfection. A gesture, a posture, a glance, everything carries meaning. A slip of decorum could undo a reputation. The poorer women watch from a distance. They see you as you glide past, radiant and unreachable. They cannot see the rash beneath the collar or the headache that's already beginning to bloom behind your eyes. All they see is an image, the marble perfection that painters adore, the saintly glow that poets praise, and in that image lies power. Even if it's killing you, it still commands awe. Back home, you remove your gloves. Your fingers are pale, stiff from the laces and metal rings that press against the skin. The maid helps you unpin your hair, each pin released like a sigh. When she combs through the strands, several come away tangled in the teeth of the comb. You don't notice, or you pretend not to. Tomorrow, you'll oil it again, and the loss will continue quietly, strand by strand. It's easy to forget, from the safety of the present, how all-consuming this ritual was. It wasn't just about beauty. It was about belonging. In a world built by men and maintained by appearances, beauty was one of the few tools women could wield. An unspoken power, fragile, temporary, and yet undeniable. And so, the Renaissance woman existed in two realities at once. One, the painted world of art and elegance, marble halls, courtly dances, whispers behind fans. The other, the private world of fatigue and fumes, burning vinegar on the skin, the pulse of pain behind the temples, the slow hollowing of the body in pursuit of grace. Outside, the city glows with the soft gold of sunset. Church bells echo across the rooftops, and you can almost hear the faint laughter of children in the square below. Somewhere, a lute begins to play. The melody drifts through the window, serene, melancholic, as though it too understands the beauty and the sadness of the world it was born into. You close your eyes. The smell of leaden roses lingers faintly in your breath, and in that stillness, you realize something, that all this suffering, all this ritual, was never just about vanity. It was about survival in a time that gave women no other language to express worth, no other shield to face the world. Every brushstroke, every bruise beneath the powder was a quiet rebellion, the only way to be seen in a world determined to overlook you. And as the last light fades from the window, the candle flickers again. That same small flame from the morning, trembling but unextinguished. A reminder that beauty, no matter how painful, was always meant to catch the light, even if it burned the one who bore it. The candle gutters once, then steadies. Outside, the wind has picked up. You hear it sliding along the shutters like a careful hand. Inside, the silence has a pulse. The quiet hum of a room that has known too many whispered secrets. You're still seated by the small table. The scent of yesterday's cosmetics lingers on your fingertips, faintly metallic, faintly floral. From somewhere down the street comes the cry of a vendor closing his stall. The city exhales. It is in these hours, between dusk and night, that beauty begins to loosen its hold. Powder softens, rouge fades, the body remembers itself. You reach for a cloth and the small bowl of rose water. The surface trembles as you dip it, catching the light from the flame. The cloth is warm against your skin, gentle now, after a day of wearing the mask. Each stroke removes a layer, but not the habit. Even in privacy, the movements are ritualized, the hand steady, the mirror waiting for approval. And then, for a heartbeat, the face that stares back is unguarded. Not a saint, not a muse, just a woman. tired and alive. In that reflection lies the most fragile kind of beauty the age would never paint. It is gone by the next blink, replaced by thought and duty again. The room smells of beeswax, hair oil, and smoke. From the street below, a cart clatters over uneven stone. You can almost picture the world turning. Bakers already mixing tomorrow's bread. Apprentices snuffing out candles in their masters' workshops. Laundresses wringing water from heavy linen. Everyone carrying traces of the same pursuit, to look presentable, respectable, unmarred by struggle. There's a strange comfort in the repetition of it all. The predictability of small actions, washing, brushing, braiding, praying, gives shape to the shapeless hours. The tools of the toilet, neatly arranged on the table, gleam faintly. A comb of bone, a jar of powder, a little bottle sealed with wax. Together, they tell the story of 1,000 mornings and nights. A story written not in words, but in gestures. Somewhere in the next room, laughter drifts through the wall. Servants sharing a joke as they fold linen. The sound feels distant, almost unreal. You smile, without knowing why. Perhaps because even in an age obsessed with surface, there were still moments that cracked through the polish, brief, human, imperfect. You stand, stretch, and walk to the window. Outside, the rooftops glow silver in the moonlight. The city looks softer now, its sharp edges blurred. You can smell the river below, a mix of mud and cool air. For the first time all day, you breathe deeply. Somewhere out there, another woman mirrors your every motion. The same sigh, the same cleansing, the same quiet wondering whether the pursuit of beauty is worth its cost. Neither of you will ever know the other exists, but the gesture binds you nonetheless. That is the secret symmetry of the Renaissance, each life echoing another, each ritual repeated until it becomes invisible. The candle burns lower. You gather your hair loosely at your neck, feeling the cool air against the nape. It's an ordinary sensation, but it feels almost holy after hours of constraint. For a moment, there is nothing between you and the night but the faint hum of your own breath. And if you listen closely, past the wind and the bells and the sleeping city, you might hear what so many women before you must have heard. That quiet voice that asks, not aloud, but in the heart, what remains when the paint is gone? Perhaps the answer is this: a still room, a tired body, a kind of peace that asks for nothing more. The candle sputters once more, drawing a thin thread of smoke. You watch it curl upward, dissolve, and vanish into the dark. The room falls silent again, and the night holds you like a hand. The night hums faintly. Outside, the city settles into silence. Somewhere, a church bell tolls the hour. Slow, distant, tender. You lie still beneath the linen, skin tingling faintly where the lead and vinegar once touched. It's a quiet ache you've learned not to name. 1,000 women breathe that same tired breath tonight, scattered across Italy's marble cities, Florence, Venice, Mantua, each one wrapped in the same ritual, the same hunger to be seen, to belong, to endure. But among them, a few rise higher. Women whose beauty becomes legend, whose portraits hang in the halls of power. Women whose faces are not merely painted, but crafted, refined through intellect, wealth, and will. And none understood that art more deeply than Isabella d'Este. She was born into privilege, daughter of dukes, wife of a marquis, surrounded by courtiers, scholars, and painters. But Isabella did not inherit her influence. She built it. In an age when a woman's image could define her worth, she made hers a weapon. Every ribbon, every pearl, every shade of powder was chosen with precision, a language of status written across her skin. Her mornings began like yours, though her mirror was framed in gold. Servants whispered instructions, brought trays of alabaster jars, and scented oils from Florence and Venice. There was nothing casual about these preparations. Each gesture was calculated, a small act in a larger campaign of self-creation. Isabella understood something few dared to speak aloud. That in a world ruled by men, appearance was strategy, charm was diplomacy, and beauty, when mastered, could move armies as surely as alliances. She understood power long before she ever held it. Even as a girl in Ferrara, Isabella learned that a woman's reputation began before she even spoke. It began in the way she entered a room, in the color of her gown, in the subtle gleam of a brooch, in the stillness of her hands when others trembled. Her tutors taught her Latin and music, but life and her mother taught her how to be looked at. By 16, Isabella d'Este was married to Francesco Gonzaga, the Marquis of Mantua. It was not a love match, but it was a powerful one. And Isabella, unlike most women of her time, had every intention of ruling, whether or not she was permitted to. She began as many powerful women of her age did, quietly, with taste. The palace she entered was vast and cold, its walls gray and bare. By the time she was finished, it had become a gallery, a place where art, music, and beauty announced the sophistication of its mistress. But the true masterpiece she curated was herself. Her face, her hair, her clothing, all composed with the same deliberation as the frescoes she commissioned. She would become known as La Prima Donna del Mondo, the First Lady of the World. To her, beauty was politics disguised as grace. She studied it, perfected it, weaponized it. She corresponded with apothecaries and perfumers, sent for new powders from Venice, imported rare pigments from Spain. In her letters, she discussed rouge as seriously as she discussed diplomacy. One merchant wrote that she had the curiosity of an alchemist and the discipline of a general. He wasn't wrong. Imagine her morning. A row of silver mirrors propped before the window, sunlight bouncing off their uneven surfaces. A maid holding a comb carved from ivory. Another stirring a mixture of almond oil and honey, thick and golden to soften her hands. Every detail mattered. The hue of her cheeks could decide how a visiting ambassador described her to his king. The shimmer of her gown could make a rumor about her husband disappear. Appearance, when mastered, was more than vanity. It was control. Even her portraits were part of her plan. She commissioned the greatest artists of her age, Leonardo da Vinci, Perugino, Titian, and gave them specific instructions. She dictated the angle of her gaze, the drape of fabric, even the shade of her skin. When Da Vinci sent her a sketch that didn't flatter her enough, she sent it back. He was Leonardo. Yes, but she was Isabella. In her letters, she often complained that painters never truly captured her. Her eyes, she said, were too sharp to be softened by their brushes. Her complexion, she insisted, should be clear but not cold. To us, it might sound vain. To her, it was strategy, because every portrait was a political document. To look serene was to appear wise. To look youthful was to appear favored by God. To look beautiful was to be believed. Her beauty routine read like the inventory of an apothecary. White lead, ceruse, vinegar, egg whites beaten into foamy masks. She believed a pale complexion reflected inner virtue. She also believed, wrongly but sincerely, that it kept illness away by sealing the pores. Each morning her maid would brush her face with a paste that shimmered faintly in the light, lead carbonate mixed with vinegar, ground pearls and honey. The effect was dazzling. The cost, invisible. By her 30s, Isabel was not only the most fashionable woman in Italy, she was its trendsetter. Other noblewomen copied her hairstyles, her jewelry, her gowns. In Florence and Venice, even those who disliked her admitted that she defined elegance, and yet those who met her in person were often startled. Her voice, they said, was firmer than expected. Her stare, direct. She was not the passive beauty her portrait suggested. She was deliberate, ambitious, and far more intelligent than most men she met. Beneath the silks and cosmetics, she was an operator. While her husband led soldiers into war, she led correspondences, negotiating alliances, arranging marriages, even funding artists for political advantage. The same steady hand that applied powder also signed decrees. The same lips that smiled politely in court dictated the terms of peace behind closed doors. And always there was the mirror. She spent hours before it, but not out of self-adoration. She was studying the most valuable thing she possessed, her image. She understood that the world did not see her as a ruler, but as a reflection. So she made the reflection unshakable. When Francesco was captured by the Venetians, it was Isabel who ruled Mantua in his absence. She received ambassadors, negotiated with popes, and held the city together while her husband languished in prison. Rumors spread that she was too composed, too confident, too serene. They meant it as criticism. She took it as proof that her mask was working. Later in life, when age began to touch her skin, she refused to yield to it. Her recipes for face creams grew stranger: crushed pearls, snail slime, and even powdered bone. The apothecaries obliged, blending her requests with the reverence usually reserved for holy relics. Each morning, she performed the same ritual, as if repetition could hold back time itself. In her final portraits, she appears poised, faintly smiling, ageless. But by then, her skin had begun to show the price of her devotion. The subtle gray hue that too much lead brings, the tremor in the hand that no one dared mention. She never admitted weakness. She would rather have been immortal in paint than honest in flesh. And in a way, she got her wish. Her likeness survives in galleries, her letters preserved in archives. Even now, her image glows with the same soft calm she demanded from her artists. A serenity bought with poison, pride, and patience. Her contemporaries admired her beauty, envied her wardrobe, copied her hair. But it was her mind, sharp as a blade, hidden beneath silk, that kept Mantua standing when empires trembled. To the world, she was an icon. To herself, she was an invention. And perhaps that is the quiet tragedy of Isabella d'Este, that she mastered the art of being seen so perfectly. She vanished behind the perfection she created. Her presence spread far beyond Mantua's walls. Letters traveled ahead of her name, carrying descriptions of her gowns, the color of her sleeves, the scent she wore on feast days. Courtiers in France, Spain, and the German principalities whispered of her the way one might speak of a comet: rare, bright, impossible to imitate. Artists begged to paint her, poets compared her to Venus, and queens quietly resented the shadow she cast. Among her rivals was Lucrezia Borgia, sister to the Pope and mistress of spectacle in Rome. The two women traded compliments in public and competed in private, each determined to outshine the other in grace, learning, and influence. When Lucrezia's portrait was unveiled in Ferrara, Isabella studied the messenger's description like a general reading a map. What shade of gown? How pale was her skin? Did she smile or not? Every detail mattered. To lose ground in appearance was to lose ground in politics. Behind closed doors, Isabella's secretaries kept inventories of her attire as carefully as the city's treasury: velvet the color of nightshade. Number 1, linen embroidered with silver thread, shoes imported from Naples, their soles scented with clove oil, so each step left behind a whisper of spice. Nothing was random. Her clothing was diplomacy made visible. When she received ambassadors, she dressed in the colors of their homelands, a gesture subtle enough to flatter, deliberate enough to impress. She could charm with conversation, too. Her study, a sanctuary of books and scrolls, smelled faintly of parchment and lemon balm. Visitors left astonished that a woman could discuss Plato with more ease than perfume recipes. But she never abandoned either pursuit. She saw no contradiction between intellect and ornament. In her mind, thought itself was a kind of adornment. Even the smallest details of her household reflected this philosophy. She commissioned musical instruments of rare woods, tapestries woven with mythic scenes, mirrors framed in gilt vines. She surrounded herself with beauty, not out of excess, but intention. She once wrote, "Harmony instructs the soul to stand upright." Perhaps she believed that to live among beautiful things was to remind oneself that order was still possible in a world ruled by chance. Yet, for all her control, time remained the one force she could not charm. As the years passed, she began to collect portraits of herself at different ages, a gallery of illusions, each one refusing to age. She sent the most flattering likenesses to foreign courts, ensuring that news of her beauty always arrived ahead of her reality. To her correspondents, Isabella was eternal. To herself, she was careful not to linger too long before the mirror in the morning light. Her letters from these later years reveal a strange tenderness. She writes of the changing fashions, of new powders arriving from Spain, of the curious pale hue of Venetian glass that makes every face appear younger. And between these lines, one can sense fatigue, the weight of a performance that has lasted too long. She was not foolish. She knew the danger of her own potions. But by then, they were part of her identity. To abandon them would be to confess mortality, and Isabelle d'Este had built her life upon the illusion of permanence. Still, there were moments of softness. A summer afternoon in the gardens of Mantua, the scent of orange blossoms in the air. She walks slowly, her hands clasped behind her back, her face turned toward the sun. For a rare moment, she allows the warmth to touch her unpainted skin. A servant hovers nearby with a parasol, but she waves him away. For a few breaths, the mask slips, and she looks not like a duchess, but a woman simply remembering what it feels like to belong to herself. But the world never let her forget who she was. The visitors, the portraits, the endless stream of letters asking for advice on fashion or art, all of them pulled her back into her own legend. In the evenings, she would read poetry aloud in her salon, the room glowing with lamplight, the walls alive with the faces of poets and saints she had commissioned. The words lingered in the air, soft and musical. Verses about beauty fading, about roses that wither, about marble that endures. She always smiled at the last line as though she already knew which of those she would become. When Isabella finally died in 1539, her attendants prepared her body with the same care she had given it in life. Her skin was dusted with powder, her lips touched with tint, her hair arranged to fall just so. In her coffin, she looked perfectly at peace, as though she had never aged, never schemed, never doubted. The illusion held until the lid closed. Centuries later, when her tomb was opened during restoration, scholars found fragments of silk, a jeweled comb, and a faint residue of white dust along the bones of her face. Even in death, the mirror remained. The last trace of her mask, lead and longing intertwined, clung to her still. And perhaps that is Isabella's final victory, and her quiet curse, to live forever in the portraits she so carefully controlled, to have her beauty admired without end, and her burden forgotten, to remind us that in the Renaissance, power wore perfume, and poison came in pearls. Even after her death, Isabella's presence lingered in Mantua like a faint scent of amber on silk. Visitors to the city still spoke of her apartments in hushed tones, the frescoed ceilings, the cabinets filled with cameos and antique glass, the tiny bottles that caught the light like captured stars. Servants whispered that on quiet nights, when the wind passed through the corridors, one could still hear the rustle of her gowns. But what truly remained was not her voice nor her step. It was her standard. In the years that followed, noble women across Europe began to imitate her style, though most had never seen her face. They copied the tilt of her head from portraits, the color of her sleeves, the pale matte finish of her skin. Apothecaries sold powders called Bianco Mantovano, Mantuan white, claiming it was the very same formula used by the Marchesa. It rarely was. But the idea alone was enough to make it precious. Painters, too, absorbed her influence. In Florence, in Venice, even as far as France, the faces of women grew more composed, their features idealized in the same measured symmetry. Isabella had demanded from her own portraitists. Her vanity, in a way, rewrote the visual language of beauty for a generation. And through that art, she achieved what she always wanted: immortality through aesthetics. But her legacy was not just on canvas. It seeped quietly into the habits of a society that had once thought of beauty as divine and now began to treat it as design. The Renaissance woman became a curator of herself, choosing pigments as carefully as a sculptor chose marble, shaping identity as deliberately as any artist shaped form. In salons from Mantua to Madrid, discussions of virtue now shared the table with discussions of complexion. The boundary between moral worth and appearance had grown so thin that even philosophers began to write about the geometry of grace. And yet there was unease beneath the perfume. Behind every painted face lay the silent echo of Isabella's own contradiction, the knowledge that perfection was both power and prison. Her influence made beauty a form of discipline. Every flaw a failure, every wrinkle a threat. The mirror, once a symbol of curiosity, had become a judge. Imagine, for a moment, one of her successors, a duchess in Milan or Florence, perhaps. She sits before her mirror in a room gilded with tapestries, her attendants mixing pastes in porcelain bowls. Outside, the city hums with trade and gossip. Inside, she repeats the gestures Isabella perfected decades before: the steady brush, the careful blending, the quiet surrender of flesh to artifice. She does not think of poison or sickness. She thinks of portraits, of reputations, of men whose opinions matter too much. The candlelight catches the white sheen of lead on her cheek, and for a brief moment, she looks immortal. In the archives of Mantua, some of Isabella's beauty recipes still survive, neatly written in elegant Italian, smudged with time. Among them, a cream of almonds and rose water, meant to nourish the skin of noble ladies. Another mixture combines vinegar, powdered coral, and honey to renew the youth of the face. And then a curious one, a tonic made of crushed pearls and mercury, to be applied before an audience with great men. The handwriting is delicate, the language serene. Nowhere does it mention the risks. It reads like prayer. Even her correspondence about art seems tinged with the same belief that beauty, if controlled precisely enough, might transcend mortality. She once wrote to a friend that the painted likeness refines the soul, for it shows us how we might have been if time were kind. A quiet confession, perhaps, that she knew the battle she was fighting could never be won. By the middle of the 16th century, her influence had spread so wide that even women she had never met spoke of her as if she were myth. Some said she had discovered a secret elixir. Others claimed she never aged because she never stepped into the sun. The truth, of course, was simpler. She understood image long before the world did. She knew that history would remember faces more readily than words. and so she left hers everywhere. Centuries later, when tourists wander through the palaces of Mantua, they still find her gaze watching from the walls. The oil has darkened, the varnish cracked, but her eyes remain unblinking, composed, amused, untouchable. Few notice the faint gray halo around the paint where the lead has begun to oxidize. Even her portrait, it seems, is slowly poisoning itself. There's a strange poetry in that, the art dying by the same elements that once created beauty. Isabella's story, then, is not just about one woman's vanity. It is about an entire world learning that beauty could be manufactured, and that once it could, it would never again belong wholly to nature. It would belong to commerce, to art, to ambition, and like all powerful inventions, it would outlive its creator. The echoes of her reflection ripple outward through portraits, powders, perfumes, until they reach the apothecary's workshops, where glass bottles catch the light and secrets simmer quietly in cauldrons. There, behind the hum of the market and the chant of the street vendors, the next chapter of this story begins. The one Isabella herself helped inspire. The world of those who made beauty. The alchemists of the mirror. The artisans of illusion. The workshops of Mantua and Venice hummed quietly beneath the grandeur that Isabella had built above them. They were small, dim spaces, rooms that smelled of vinegar, ash, and oil, where apprentices ground powders until their hands turned pale. Here, beauty was born not in mirrors, but in mortar bowls. The women of the court might speak of elegance and grace, but the men and women who mixed their lotions spoke a different language, that of chemistry and patience, of the slow rhythm of pestle against stone. It was said that Isabel herself often sent her servants to these very shops. She wanted the purest ceruse, the finest vermilion, the rarest scent distilled from flowers that bloomed only for a few days each year. But even she may not have realized how much her curiosity helped turn these humble rooms into centers of quiet innovation. The apothecaries were no longer simple herbalists. They had become early scientists, creating not medicine but transformation. They traded ingredients that crossed continents, saffron from the East, amber from the Baltic, ground coral from the Red Sea. Every jar carried the trace of a faraway world. It was as though beauty itself had become a kind of empire, expanding through commerce, shaped by trade routes as much as taste. When Isabella rubbed a paste onto her cheek, she was, in a way, touching the hands of countless unseen workers, miners, sailors, spice merchants, perfumers, all connected in the same intricate web of vanity and invention. And in this way, her influence seeped into the very fabric of the Renaissance. What had begun as a personal ritual became a cultural performance, one repeated in every noble household that aspired to refinement. Her obsession with elegance created an economy. Venetian merchants sold glass mirrors by the hundreds. Florentine workshops produced endless shades of rouge. Even in distant France, court ladies copied her pale tones, unaware of the poison they were imitating. Painters, too, felt her reach. When Titian mixed his pigments to capture the light of skin, he borrowed from the same powders the apothecaries used, lead white, vermilion, ochre, the same ingredients that brightened a duchess's cheek, brightened a Madonna's face on canvas. Art and beauty were no longer separate pursuits. They had fused into one shared illusion. And at the center of it all was Isabel, the woman who made the human face a canvas of power. Her salon became the mirror of Italy's ambition. Scholars debated philosophy under ceilings painted with myth. Musicians performed madrigals written in her honor. Even visiting diplomats, hardened by politics, found themselves speaking more softly in her presence. She had mastered the art of atmosphere, not just her own, but the world around her. When she spoke, her voice was low and deliberate, like a song half remembered. When she smiled, even her enemies hesitated before replying. But beneath the elegance, there was fatigue. The years of perfection left their quiet marks, the headaches that grew more frequent, the tremor in her hands when she signed letters. Still, she refused to surrender to time. If anything, she grew more devoted to the mirror, as though its reflection could protect her from decline. She began to speak of light differently, how it fell, how it revealed, how it might be coaxed to show only what one wished others to see. To her, control of appearance had become control of truth. There's something haunting about that, the idea that in her final years, surrounded by art and flattery, she began to live entirely within her own portrait. Perhaps she found comfort there in the stillness of painted perfection. Perhaps she feared that once the image cracked, the woman beneath would vanish altogether. After her death, her successors tried to mimic her grace, but never quite succeeded. They wore her colors, they copied her letters, but none possessed the same strange patience, that calm intensity that made even silence feel deliberate. And so, with her passing, the golden balance between intellect and ornament began to tilt. What she had built as art soon hardened into imitation. Beauty, once a language, became a rule. The court ladies of the next generation inherited her image without her insight. They followed recipes blindly, painted their faces too white, their hair too bright, until even physicians began to warn of the sickness of vanity. They didn't listen, because by then the mirror no longer reflected truth, only expectation. And the expectation was hers. In that sense, Isabella d'Este's legacy was both gift and curse. And she had shown women that the mirror could be a weapon, but she had also taught the world to measure them by its reflection. Even now, 5 centuries later, her shadow lingers in the way faces are lit, the way eyes search for approval in glass. Every photograph, every portrait, every act of self-presentation owes something to her quiet revolution. If she could see us now, our lights, our mirrors, our endless images, perhaps she would smile that small, knowing smile of hers. She might recognize the ambition beneath the gloss, the same hunger that once drove her to perfect every gesture. And maybe for the first time, she would feel something close to satisfaction. Because the world finally became what she always imagined it could be. A place where beauty was not merely seen but believed. The world she shaped continued to shimmer long after she was gone. Her name faded from daily speech, but her image remained, multiplied across portraits, imitated in fashion, whispered through centuries of imitation. Even the artists who had painted her likeness began to forget the woman behind it. They remembered only the balance she had perfected. Grace without motion, light without flaw. In Mantua, her old apartment stood silent. The air still smelled faintly of oil paint and dust, as if the ghosts of pigments lingered there. A ray of sunlight, falling through the shutters, illuminated the corner where her mirror once stood, cracked, clouded, reflecting only fragments. Yet in that broken glass, there was still something alive. The same pale shimmer she once sought, the echo of her discipline, the residue of her design. Outside those walls, the world moved on. New rulers rose and fell. Wars came and went, erasing entire dynasties. But beauty, the kind Isabella had defined, never truly died. It adapted, transformed, crossed borders, languages, generations. Each age found its own reflection in hers. And though no one could trace the lineage precisely, her spirit lingered in every formula, every pigment, every whispered promise that one could become perfect again if only the mixture were right. The laboratories of the apothecaries grew busier, the recipes more complex, and slowly the pursuit of beauty began to look less like devotion and more like discovery. The mirror remained the same, But what it reflected was changing. No longer the face of one woman, but the collective dream of a civilization. A dream Isabella d'Este had once glimpsed in the surface of polished glass. And somewhere, in the narrow back rooms of Renaissance cities, that dream was being distilled, drop by drop, into small bottles, sealed with wax, and labeled with names that promised the impossible. The door closes behind you with a soft thud, and for a moment the sounds of the street disappear. Inside, the world feels smaller, denser, a world of glass, metal, and scent. Light filters through high windows, catching on dust that hangs like pale smoke. Every surface glints faintly: copper basins, mortars stained with years of pigment, long-necked flasks filled with liquids the color of sunrise and bone. The apothecary moves quietly, like a priest in a chapel. His hands are steady, his eyes bright with the calm of routine. He knows the value of silence. Too many secrets float in this air. Here, knowledge is wealth and beauty is business. You can hear the slow rhythm of his work, the grinding of powder, the whisper of paper torn to wrap it, the faint hiss of oil warming over a small flame. On the wall behind him hang bundles of dried herbs: rosemary, sage, marjoram, each carrying its own story. He could tell you which flowers are for fragrance and which ones burn the skin if left too long. He knows how much lead makes the paste smooth without killing too quickly. He would never admit that knowledge aloud. Women come and go through the narrow door. A noblewoman veiled in silk, her maid carrying coins in a small pouch. A washerwoman with roughened hands, trading eggs for a vial of perfume. Each one lowers her voice, confiding desires that sound like confessions. A fairer complexion, smoother skin, a way to turn heads. The apothecary listens, nods, measures powders by weight of reputation. He writes down their orders in a ledger, using names that sound like poetry. The water of Radiance, Venetian dew, milk of the moon. To read the list aloud is to read a litany of longing, each phrase promising transformation, none offering truth. Behind him, a young apprentice grinds coral into dust. The pestle moves in circles, slow and steady. The air fills with a faint red haze, beautiful and dangerous. The apprentice coughs, but keeps working. Beauty, after all, requires endurance. The apothecary doesn't look up. He is testing a new mixture: almond oil, vinegar, and something brought from the East called sublimate. He has heard it whitens the skin perfectly, though it sometimes burns through it. This is what the Renaissance called science, a marriage of wonder and ignorance. Every discovery walked a line between miracle and mistake. The apothecary doesn't know the words toxic or chemical reaction. He knows only cause and effect, the strange alchemy of the visible. When the paste turns smooth, when it shimmers just so under the light, he knows it will sell. At night, when the shutters close and the candles burn low, he sometimes stares at the bottles arranged on the shelves. Each one holds a secret color: turquoise from ground azurite, rose from crushed insects, gold from powdered mica. They look almost holy in the dim light, and perhaps they are in their own way. For in these bottles lie the dreams of a society, the longing to escape time, to become flawless, to touch divinity for a moment through the skin. In another city, a monk performs the same work in secret. He is an apothecary too, though he calls his mixtures unguents and justifies them with scripture. In the monastery's herb garden, he distills oils of lavender, chamomile, and thyme, whispering prayers over the cauldron. He tells himself it is for healing, though he too sells small jars of rose balm to noblewomen who visit the cloister with heavy purses and curious eyes. The church frowns upon vanity, yet its own priests anoint themselves with fragrant oils before processions. Sin and sanctity mixed in equal parts, the recipes travel quietly, copied by hand, traded for favors, smuggled in bundles of letters. One page might describe a cure for fever. The next, a salve for the lightening of the skin and the preservation of youth. Some ingredients read like spells, serpent's tongue, powdered bone, rainwater collected under a crescent moon. Whether they work or not hardly matters. The act of believing they might is often enough. In Venice, entire streets begin to specialize in this trade. Glassblowers shape bottles so delicate they look like frozen air. Merchants advertise their wares with painted signs. A woman's profile, pale and serene, her hair the color of wheat. The city smells of salt and rosewater, of ambition disguised as fragrance. Every house has its secret recipe, every workshop its guarded formula. And beneath it all, the same quiet faith that perfection can be manufactured if one just learns the right combination of elements. Imagine holding one of those bottles. The glass is cool against your palm, the liquid inside faintly iridescent. You unseal the wax and the scent rises sharp, floral, oddly metallic. It promises transformation, and for a heartbeat, you believe it. That's the real alchemy of this age, not turning lead into gold, but turning hope into commerce. For every jar sold in the name of beauty, another was made in pursuit of medicine. The boundary between the two blurred easily. What soothed the skin might also numb pain. What dulled blemishes might cure fever or cause it. Even the apothecaries no longer knew where vanity ended and remedy began. In their eyes, all creation was a kind of healing. They were not deceivers. They were dreamers with steady hands. The shelves groan under the weight of those dreams, oils, powders, tinctures, and dyes. Each one distilled from patience and belief. When the city outside sleeps, a faint light glows through the apothecary's shutters, flickering like a star that refuses to fade. And in that dim light, the line between art and science blurs once more. The same line that Isabelle d'Este walked her whole life between illusion and influence, beauty and power. The alchemists would never meet her, but in their own way, they continued her work. They sought control over the unpredictable, the body, the face, the fleeting nature of youth. They didn't paint like Leonardo or sculpt like Michelangelo, yet they too created masterpieces, invisible ones, worn on the skin, washed away each night, reborn each morning. And perhaps in their quiet rooms, among fumes and candlelight, they were the true artists of the age. Outside, the bells of Venice toll the hour, their sound muffled by mist. The apothecary's flame flickers, and the liquid inside his flask shifts from clear to gold. He leans closer, studying the change, the way a painter studies light. It is not art he practices. Not exactly, and yet it feels the same. Each batch a gamble. Each success a brief defiance of decay. The door opens, and a woman enters. Her cloak is damp with rain, her gloves thin enough that her fingers tremble in the cold. She lowers her hood, and for a moment the apothecary sees what she has come to erase. Faint lines near the mouth, a tiredness around the eyes. She asks for aqua di gioventù, the water of youth. He nods, says nothing, and begins to pour. The liquid runs like melted pearl. He corks the bottle and wraps it carefully, his movements almost reverent. She presses coins into his hand and leaves without a word. He watches the door close and listens to her steps fade into the night. He has seen that same exchange 1,000 times. It never feels ordinary. Every sale is an act of faith, small and solemn, two strangers meeting at the edge of time. Above, in the rooms of noblewomen and courtesans, the products of his labor glow by candlelight. Powders brushed over faces, rouges dabbed on cheeks, hair soaked in rinses of vinegar and herbs, left to dry beneath the moon. The rituals repeat in quiet succession, forming the unseen rhythm of the age of the daily choreography of transformation. In Florence, another kind of alchemist works in secret. Not in a shop, but in a workshop that smells of pigment and varnish. A painter named Lorenzo tests a new mixture for his portraits. Lead white softened with oil and crushed pearl, a recipe borrowed from the cosmetics of his patron's wife. When the paint dries, it gleams faintly, alive with the same glow that women seek on their skin. The boundaries between art and vanity dissolve completely. Every canvas becomes a mirror. The fascination with transformation spreads outward, infecting every trade. Glassblowers experiment with clarity, seeking pure reflections. Perfumers attempt to bottle not just scent but emotion, the fragrance of innocence, the aroma of grace. Tailors design sleeves that conceal the body's imperfections while suggesting divine proportion. The Renaissance is no longer just an era of discovery. It is an era of disguise. In the hidden corners of manuscripts, strange notes begin to appear. Margins filled with warnings in small, slanted script. Avoid the fumes. Mix only in daylight. Do not breathe too close. Even as the recipes spread, so too does a quiet unease. Some who work too long among the powders begin to cough, their fingertips turning pale. A few lose their hair. A few simply disappear. No one connects the dots. Not yet. The poisons are slow, polite, well-mannered. They wait their turn. Still, the trade continues. To stop would mean to admit the truth that beauty's promise is borrowed, never owned. And so, they keep mixing, keep selling, keep believing. The illusion must not falter. The mirror must always answer kindly. By the late 16th century, new mixtures appear in the markets. Subtler powders, lighter perfumes, creams that claim to breathe with the skin. Science begins to replace superstition, or so people say. But the core belief remains untouched. That the face can be rewritten, the body improved, the soul revealed through artifice. It's easy to forget now how much courage these early creators possessed. They worked with mystery, not certainty, guided by instinct and observation rather than proof. Each experiment risked sickness, explosion, or simply failure. Yet they persisted, driven by the same quiet desire that had moved Isabella and her world, to master what time takes away. At night, the apothecary extinguishes his flame and looks out through the narrow window. Across the canal, the lights of other workshops glow faintly in the fog. He imagines them all at their tables, stirring, measuring, hoping. He cannot see their faces, but he knows they share the same devotion, the same small, stubborn faith, that perfection, though fleeting, is worth pursuing. The city sleeps. The water laps against the stones, and somewhere in the dark, a bottle cools on a windowsill, its contents settling into stillness. In the morning, someone will buy it, open it, and touch the past to their skin. And for a few shimmering moments, they will believe they have found eternity. Morning returns quietly to the lagoon. Mist hangs low over the canals, softening the outlines of domes and towers. The apothecaries open their shutters, the faint clinking of glass echoing between narrow walls. A new day, another cycle of transformation. Inside one small shop, the apprentice from the night before begins his work again. His fingers are stained red from cinnabar, his nails rimmed with white from powdered chalk. He hums as he grinds, unaware that the very breath he takes draws poison slowly into his lungs. He does not yet know that beauty has always demanded silent sacrifices, that every perfect face somewhere conceals the labor, the illness, the exhaustion of those who made it possible. The street outside grows busier. Women hurry past in layers of silk and linen, faces veiled against the cold. Each carries a small pouch or bottle, tucked safely away like a secret. Some of them will use it sparingly, as though afraid of its power. Others will apply it boldly, painting confidence onto their skin with trembling hands. In this age, appearance is more than ornament. It is the currency of survival. As the day warms, a merchant's wife stops by the shop to purchase a new rouge. She leans close to the mirror on the counter, testing shades upon her wrist. The reflection is kind, the light from the window forgives. She smiles faintly, not because she feels beautiful, but because for a moment she can believe she might be. The apothecary watches her go and returns to his mixing. His tools are old, the handles worn smooth. He no longer needs to measure. His hands know the rhythm of each blend by memory. He doesn't think about what he's creating. He thinks of who it's for. Each jar, a small hope in someone else's day. Each paste a promise, fragile and temporary, but deeply human. Beyond Venice, the craft spreads inland. Florence, Bologna, Milan. Each city cultivates its own school of beauty. Recipes are refined, perfumes distilled with greater precision. Artisans begin to sign their work, proud to be known for it. In a world obsessed with legacy, even the makers of illusion crave permanence. But among them whispers rise, stories of noblewomen who have fallen ill, of strange fevers and gray skin. Physicians argue in Latin whether these deaths are divine punishment or simply vanity gone too far. None dare suggest the truth that the same ingredients adorning the faces of queens are quietly killing them. The contradiction goes unnoticed because it must. The illusion is too profitable, too comforting, to question. Still, the signs are there. In one noble household, a lady's mirror is found veiled in cloth. She cannot bear to see how pale she has become. In another, a servant throws away a jar of whitening paste that smells faintly of metal and vinegar, afraid to touch it. But the court painter continues his commissions, immortalizing those same faces before they fade. Even illness cannot dull the demand for perfection. Over time, the practice becomes gentler in name, if not in truth. Alchemists rebrand themselves as philosophers of the complexion, and their laboratories become salons. They write small treatises, part science, part poetry, describing the balance between the four humors, the ideal proportions of a face, the virtues of moderation. They speak of harmony and purity, of elegance as a reflection of the divine. But the bottles on their shelves remain the same, and the hands that mix them tremble no less. One could walk through any Renaissance city and trace the same invisible thread, from the apothecary's mortar to the artist's palette, from the noblewoman's vanity to the dying servant's hands, from the promise of purity to the quiet corrosion of time. And yet, through all of this, there is beauty. Not the artificial kind painted on the skin, but something deeper. The beauty of striving, of creation, of believing that imperfection can be tamed, even for a moment. In its own way, that faith built an empire of glass and scent and light. The centuries will move on. The recipes will change. Science will give new names to old poisons. But the yearning that began here in these dim workshops and perfumed halls will remain. It will echo in the powders of later centuries, in the rouge pots of Rococo, in the cold creams of Victorian vanity, and in the fluorescent mirrors of the modern age. Different tools, same desire. As dusk falls again, the last light slips across the counters of the apothecary's shop. The bottles glow faintly, like sleeping fireflies. The apprentice closes the shutters and wipes the dust from his hands. In the silence that follows, he can almost hear the heartbeat of the city, steady, shallow, wrapped in silk and smoke. A heartbeat that has always belonged to beauty, to artifice. to the belief that what fades can somehow be made to stay. Night folds gently over the city again. The canals turn black and mirror the lights that flicker in upper windows, candles burning behind lace curtains, reflections trembling like ghosts upon the water. The apothecary's shop stands dark now, its door bolted, its scents lingering in the air like unspoken prayers. A trace of rose, a hint of smoke, the faint bitterness of lead. All of it will settle by morning, invisible but not gone. In the quiet, the city breathes. You can almost hear it, the rhythm of countless small vanities, of brushes against skin, of bottles opening, of footsteps echoing in marble corridors. Each sound part of a ritual that has outgrown its makers. No longer mere craft, no longer mere commerce, but culture itself. Beauty has become its own faith. A daily devotion that demands no temple, only reflection. And in that reflection, the Renaissance reveals its truest face. It is not the face of saints or scholars, but of ordinary people, women and men chasing a perfection they could never hold, believing that grace might be mixed, bottled, applied. They never knew that what they sought was already in their hands, the patience to create, the courage to try again, the quiet longing to transcend what is fleeting. The candles burn lower. The apprentices sleep beside their workbenches, fingers still dusted white. Above them, the noble houses dream their golden dreams of youth, of admiration, of eternal poise. But time moves as it always does, silent and certain. By morning, another layer of powder will crack, another mirror will cloud, another formula will promise what none can deliver. Still, they will return. Because hope, too, has a fragrance, faint, familiar, impossible to resist. And somewhere in those upper rooms, where the air smells of wax and perfume and ambition, the story continues. The powders will find their faces. The illusions will find their audience. And the people who wear them will step once more into the golden light of power. The palace corridors glow with candlelight, and laughter drifts through the air like perfume. Silks rustle, jewels catch the light, and a dozen painted faces smile beneath ceilings gilded with myth. But here, behind every smile, behind every mask of grace, lies a quiet dread, the fear of losing the illusion. The elite of the Renaissance lived in constant performance. Their lives unfolded like theater, each gesture choreographed for admiration, each glance carefully measured. The banquets, the salons, the feasts, all of it shimmered with the same golden tension, the desperate need to appear untouched by imperfection. Power had become inseparable from presentation, and the mirror, once a curiosity of vanity, had become a judge, a weapon, and a confessional all at once. In these grand rooms, where walls glittered with frescoes and ceilings dripped with gold, the air itself was heavy with scent, amber, musk, and the faint metallic sweetness of lead powder warming on skin. Ladies of the court moved like living portraits, faces pale and serene, their eyes shadowed just enough to suggest melancholy or mystery. Men, too, joined the masquerade. Their hair curled with scented oils, their collars stiffened into sculpted frames that forced posture and pride into one unyielding shape. To dine among them was to witness art performed in flesh. Every seat, every plate, every glance was an act of silent competition. A misplaced laugh, a smudge of color too bright, a tremor of fatigue, these were risks that could ruin reputations. In such company, appearance was armor. To falter in grace was to surrender in battle. The queen of this particular evening sits beneath a vast painting of Venus, her gown shimmering like a ripple of moonlight. Her face is flawless, her expression calm, though she feels the heat rising beneath the layers of powder. The lead itches faintly, but she does not move. Not when the courtiers praise her wit, not when the Duke at her side leans closer, his breath scented with wine and arrogance. Stillness is her defense. Composure, her crown. Nearby, a musician plucks the strings of a lute, his melody soft enough to blend with the low murmur of voices. The guests nod, drink, and whisper, their laughter swelling and fading like waves. To an outsider, it might seem a scene of ease, an evening of beauty and grace, but beneath the surface lies exhaustion. The women's gowns weigh nearly as much as armor. Their corsets bruise their ribs. Their smiles are held as long as their breath allows. They are not merely adorned. They are bound by fabric, by expectation, by the invisible pressure to be admired and envied in equal measure. For those born into privilege, freedom was not something one possessed. It was something one performed. Servants move like shadows through the hall, refilling glasses, adjusting candles, fanning away the heat. They are invisible and indispensable, their labor the machinery that keeps the illusion alive. They know the truth of their master's beauty, the powders that stain linens, the wigs that conceal thinning hair, the bottles hidden in cabinets labeled for complexion. They see the faces without their masks, the stains on pillows, the trembling hands before a feast begins. They see humanity where the rest of the world sees perfection. In private, even the noblest women allow their masks to slip, not by choice, but by necessity. The powders itch, the rouge cracks, the corset strings bite into skin. The candlelight is softer here, kinder, but the mirror remains merciless. One by one, they face it. They remove the paint, the jewels, the layers of fabric, until only the body remains, pale, fragile, marked by the weight of beauty. For a moment, they stand still, neither goddess nor ghost, but something in between. It is in those quiet moments, behind closed doors, that the true cruelty of the age reveals itself. The standards of beauty were not designed to be achieved. They were designed to keep the powerful restless, chasing an image of divinity, while fearing the humanity beneath it. A perfect trap, disguised as admiration. And yet, they believed in it fiercely, tenderly, hopelessly, because to stop believing was to become invisible. In a world built on spectacle, fading was worse than death. The night grows later. The music slows. The candles shrink into stubs. The laughter, once bright, dissolves into murmurs. One by one, the guests begin to leave, their reflections flickering across polished silver and glass as they pass. When the last door closes, the hall feels suddenly hollow, the perfume lingering longer than the people who wore it. Upstairs, a lady sits before her mirror, still half-painted. She dips a cloth into a basin of water, watches the colors swirl and fade. Her face emerges, bare and uncertain. The air feels colder now, honest in a way she's forgotten. She wonders, briefly, what it might feel like to walk into daylight without the armor of artifice. But the thought passes quickly. Tomorrow brings another feast, another crowd, another performance. The mask will return because the mask is safer. Outside, dawn begins to break, the sky turning pale above the rooftops. The city wakes slowly, unaware of the exhaustion behind its elegance. And within those palaces, where the mirrors still glimmer faintly in the half-light, the painted faces of the Renaissance rest, perfect, motionless, and utterly human. The light that creeps into the palaces is thin and gray, the kind that turns gold to dust. It spills across the banquet tables, over the discarded garlands, over the plates still shining faintly with the memory of last night's feast. The air smells of wax and wilted roses. Servants move through the silence, gathering the remains, empty cups, fallen ribbons, the faint trace of perfume that clings to the velvet seats. They walk carefully so as not to wake the world that still pretends to be sleeping. In an upper room, a nobleman stands before his mirror. He adjusts his collar, studies the fatigue beneath his eyes. The reflection looks regal enough, but his face tells another story, one of indulgence and decay. He smooths his hair with oil, hides the tremor in his hands. He knows that by noon he must appear before the Duke again, composed and radiant, as though the night's excess has left no mark. He takes a sip of cordial, honeyed, strong, laced with herbs meant to restore vigor. It burns on the way down. The warmth feels reassuring, even as it sharpens the ache in his chest. In another chamber, a woman watches the morning light catch in the crystals of her window. The glow softens the lines at her eyes, makes her feel momentarily young again. She reaches for a small box of powder, dips her brush into the fine white dust, and begins the familiar motion, the quiet covering of time. Each stroke steadies her. Each layer erases something. The sleepless night, the faint bruising where her corset pressed too tightly, the silence she carries like a second skin. The mirror does not judge. It never does. It simply reflects what it's given. A painted face, a careful lie, the steady persistence of belief. And in that reflection, she finds the strength to stand, to smile, to greet the world again. The illusion, she knows, is fragile, but it is also necessary. It keeps her visible in a society where fading is a form of death. The halls below begin to stir. Pages sweep the marble floors. The clatter of trays echoes softly through the corridors. Soon the palace will come alive again. Voices rehearsing politeness, laughter rehearsed even more. The same play, performed daily for an audience that knows every line and still applauds. To live in this world is to live beneath constant light. The chandeliers, the candles, the morning sun, all of them conspire to reveal there is no darkness here, deep enough to hide imperfection. So they create their own shadows, layers of paint, fabric, gesture, each one a shield against scrutiny, each one an attempt to make existence appear effortless. Yet beneath the sheen of perfection, something more delicate endures, a kind of exhaustion that borders on tenderness. The quiet moments between movements when a woman pauses to breathe before reapplying her mask. The brief look exchanged between two guests who recognize the same weariness behind each other's eyes. In those fleeting seconds, honesty flickers like candlelight, fragile, beautiful, and quickly extinguished. There is poetry in their pretense, a strange grace in their struggle to appear divine when all they ever were was human. Perhaps that, more than any art or architecture, was the true achievement of their age. To transform their longing into spectacle, their vulnerability into ritual. They painted over their pain and called it refinement. They disguised their fear of time and called it elegance. By afternoon, the palace hums again. Music rises from the courtyard. Couriers bring letters sealed in wax. Some carry invitations to new feasts. Others rumors dressed as news. The same cycle begins anew. Powder, laughter, rivalry, regret. The courtiers move through it like dancers tracing familiar steps, the rhythm steady, the melody unchanging. Above it all, the mirrors watch, dozens of them hanging in gilded frames, set into cabinets, hidden behind drapes, reflecting the endless performance of wealth and grace. Each reflection slightly different, each one catching a fragment of truth that the others deny. Together they create a chorus of illusions, a shimmering echo of a society that cannot bear to look away from itself. And when the evening comes again, and the torches burn, and the faces glow once more with borrowed light, it will seem as if nothing has changed. As if the laughter from the night before has simply resumed its refrain. But beneath the music, beneath the silk and the scent, the same quiet truth hums on, that even the most gilded mask cannot hide the passing of time. As the afternoon light slants across the marble floors, the rhythm of the palace settles into its familiar calm. Servants whisper, musicians tune their instruments, and in the distance, church bells call out the hour as if to remind everyone that time still moves, even here, where everything seems designed to hold it still. In a smaller drawing room overlooking the gardens, two women sit together, speaking in low voices. Their laughter is soft, restrained, practiced. Each compliment given carries a hidden calculation. Each glance is both friendship and rivalry. They speak of new fabrics arriving from Florence, of a rumored cream that promises to erase the signs of sleeplessness, of a visiting portraitist who paints only the truth. Neither admits the quiet dread that the word truth inspires. One woman, younger, watches her companion carefully. The elder's skin is still smooth, still luminous in the afternoon light, though she knows it was once paler, once brighter. The younger one studies her, not out of cruelty, but curiosity, the same curiosity that had driven generations before her to mirrors and powders and prayers. She wonders how long beauty lasts, when the eyes that behold it change faster than the face itself. Outside, the gardens shimmer in the late sun. Fountains glint, roses bloom in tight, impossible symmetry. From here, everything looks orderly, perfect, a mirror of the people who walk among it. But the air smells faintly of decay beneath the sweetness of the flowers. The petals that fall are swept away before anyone can see them, as if the garden itself participates in the illusion. A page enters quietly and bows. A carriage has arrived. The Duchess of Urbino, known for her wit and her sharpness, both of which cut deeper than politeness allows. The women rise, straighten their gowns, and in an instant their voices change, lighter, warmer, brighter. They smile not from joy, but from instinct. This is how survival sounds when wrapped in silk. The Duchess enters like a storm disguised as grace. Her gown glitters with silver thread. Her hair is arranged in braids that gleam like rope spun from light. Her words, though kind, land with the precision of a blade. She compliments one woman's complexion, then mentions how pale it looked only last month. She praises the other's gown, but adds that green is such a dangerous color for anyone without perfect skin. They laugh together, their smiles brittle as porcelain. This is the other side of beauty, not the longing, but the cruelty it breeds. The mask, once a shield, becomes a weapon. Each face polished to flawlessness reflects not only light, but judgment. Every woman in this room knows the unspoken rule. To admire another too much is to concede power. To look away too soon is to appear insecure. Their gazes cross and uncross like swords in silence. In the corner, a musician begins to play again, a slow pavane that fills the spaces between their words. Its rhythm is stately, deliberate, heavy with restraint. It seems to echo the way they all breathe, the way they all move. Elegance is exhausting when it becomes obligation. Later, when the guests have gone and the corridors fall silent once more, the Duchess stands before her mirror. She removes her jewelry one piece at a time, each earring, each bracelet, each ring, leaving behind a faint indentation on her skin. For the first time all day, her shoulders drop. The silence is heavier than the music ever was. Her reflection looks unfamiliar without the glow of candlelight, the face too real, the eyes too human. She reaches for a small jar on the table, a cream said to restore the softness of youth. Its scent is faintly floral, faintly chemical. She applies it carefully, not because she believes in it anymore, but because she cannot imagine what it would mean to stop. The ritual is older than faith and more comforting than truth. In its repetition lies a strange peace. a rhythm that lulls the mind even as the body rebels. Outside her window, the night deepens. The city glows in scattered points of light, reflections trembling on the water. From a distance, it looks serene, perfect, eternal. But within those walls, mirrors multiply the same fragile dream that beauty once earned can somehow be kept. And though every woman here knows it is a dream, still they chase it, tenderly, tirelessly, because to live surrounded by such splendor and to let it fade would feel like betrayal, not of others, but of themselves. Tomorrow, the feast will begin again. The same perfumes, the same laughter, the same painted calm. The masks will gleam, the mirrors will flatter, and the game will go on, as endless as the tolling of the bells. As inevitable as time itself, the last candle burns low. Its light trembles across the marble, flickering over half-empty goblets and wilted flowers. Somewhere, a door closes softly, followed by the whisper of footsteps retreating down a long corridor. The palace exhales, finally free of its audience. For a moment, the silence feels sacred, as though even time has chosen to pause and listen. In that hush, the grandeur fades. The gold loses its luster. The painted ceilings seem to sag beneath their own splendor. And all that remains are the echoes of laughter, of music, of the small, fragile hearts that beat beneath all that finery. Behind closed doors, mirrors rest in the dark. They hold within them the day's parade of faces, powdered, polished, perfect, but now those reflections sleep too, dissolved into shadow. Even the most polished surface must eventually surrender to stillness. The women who wore their beauty like armor are now unadorned, their breaths steady and shallow beneath heavy quilts. The men who played at confidence lie in silence, their hands unclenched, their masks forgotten beside the bed. For all their wealth, their striving, their elegance, they look now like what they always were: soft, mortal, human. Outside, the night air cools the stones of the city. Lanterns sway above the canals, their reflections stretching like ribbons of gold upon the black water. The hum of life fades into distance until only the faint rhythm of waves remains, a heartbeat as old as history itself. And perhaps that is the quiet truth the Renaissance never painted. That beneath every powder, beneath every layer of silk and ritual, there is the same quiet longing to be seen, to be remembered, to be loved, if only for a moment. They called it beauty. They built a world around it. But what they were really chasing was grace, a fleeting glimpse of eternity in the mirror of a single day. The candle sighs, then dies, leaving only the faint scent of smoke and roses. The room settles into shadow, and as the city dreams beneath its own reflection, so too does history, soft, luminous, and still. If you enjoyed drifting through history tonight, consider subscribing before you fall asleep. It helps this little corner of the internet keep growing, one quiet story at a time. And if you're still awake, leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from. I love seeing the map fill up with night owls. Sleep well and good night. The past lingers quietly, like the scent of candle smoke long after the flame has gone. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the echo of their footsteps, the women at their mirrors, the merchants in their stalls, the painters and apothecaries bent over their workbenches. They are gone, every one of them, and yet their gestures remain. The act of reaching for the mirror, of softening the face, of hoping to hold time still for one more moment, it is as familiar to us now as it was to them. Centuries have turned, and still the ritual survives. The powder has changed its name. The bottles have taken new shapes. The materials have lost their danger. Or so we like to believe. But the impulse behind them, That small flicker of human longing has not aged at all. It moves quietly beneath the surface of our days, a kind of inheritance passed through touch and memory. When you look into the mirror tonight, you are closer to Isabella d'Este than you might imagine. The glass between you and your reflection is thinner than history suggests. The Renaissance promised eternity through art. But art, for all its beauty, was never truly eternal. It cracked, it faded, it grew dark with the years. The faces painted in its time, once luminous, alive, flawless, now look back at us from beneath layers of yellowed varnish. And yet there is something more human in them now than there ever was. The perfection has softened, the illusion has aged into truth. In their decay, they have become real again. That is what beauty does when it is left alone long enough. It returns to honesty. The powders flake away. The colors lose their shine. But what remains? The effort, the patience, the wish to be seen, that endures. It hums quietly through the centuries, neither proud nor ashamed, simply present. Sometimes, when walking through a museum, you might pass one of those portraits, a pale woman in velvet, her gaze cool, her skin impossibly smooth. You stop, and for a second, you meet her eyes. It is not admiration that passes between you, but recognition. You both know what it costs to keep a calm face in a changing world. You both know the silence that hides behind grace. And in that instant, the 500 years between you dissolve. The Renaissance believed mirrors showed truth. But truth, it turns out, is a complicated thing. Even now, we build our lives around reflections, glass screens, photographs, the quick shimmer of our own image caught in passing. We have made mirrors of everything, and everything of mirrors. Our rooms glow with the same soft light that once touched those marble halls. Only the materials have changed. The desire remains identical. Imagine for a moment how their world would see ours. They would marvel at the ease, the abundance of light, the endless surfaces that capture our faces. And perhaps they would envy it, this power to preserve every instant. But perhaps, too, they would pity us. For we have found ways to hold on to images, but not ways to quiet the heart that looks into them. They feared time, we fear invisibility. It is not so different. There's a quiet irony in knowing that the very tools meant to immortalize beauty have only made it more fragile. Back then, the portrait was a single moment sealed in oil and patience. Now we create thousands every day, and yet remember almost none. Their faces endured centuries because they were rare. Hours flicker by and vanish in seconds. Maybe eternity was never meant to be a collection of perfect moments, only the endurance of the imperfect ones. And still, there is tenderness in the attempt. The act of brushing hair, of adjusting light, of seeking some balance between how we feel and how we appear. It's the same small kindness to the self that those Renaissance women once practiced in dim rooms of stone and candle. They did not know that in doing so, they were shaping the future's idea of beauty. We, in turn, do not know what gestures of ours will outlast us. History, after all, has always been written by hands that believe they were only living. If you close your eyes, you can picture the rhythm of it all. The grinding of powder in a distant apothecary. The scrape of a brush against canvas. The hush of silk against marble as a woman leans toward her mirror. The sounds fade, but the rhythm stays. Human hands repeating the same small movements in every age, as if to remind the universe that it is still being observed. Perhaps that is why beauty matters at all, not because it lasts, but because it insists on being noticed, even when everything else turns to dust. Each ritual, each reflection, each portrait was a way of saying, I am here for now. And that, in the quietest way, is what connects every century to the next. When Isabella d'Este lifted her mirror, she saw her own face, of course. But behind it, unseen, stood the faces of the women before her, and before them others still, the nameless ones who boiled herbs and crushed petals in wooden bowls. Every reflection carries a lineage, and every lineage eventually returns to the same question: if beauty fades, what does it leave behind? Maybe only gentleness. Maybe only the memory of the hands that tried. Maybe the faint scent of rosewater in the dust. Time has a way of softening its judgments. It strips away the vanity, the rivalry, the fevered pursuit, until all that remains is the evidence of care. Look long enough, and even obsession becomes tenderness. The mirrors that once commanded attention now simply hold light. They are no longer instruments of comparison, only quiet witnesses to the people who once believed in them. And perhaps that is the true legacy of the Renaissance. Not its art, not its science, not even its wealth, but its awareness of transience. It understood that perfection could only exist for a heartbeat. It spent centuries trying to stretch that heartbeat into eternity. And though it failed, it left behind the proof that trying was beautiful enough. Some nights, when you stand before your own reflection, the light low and the world silent, you might see a faint echo of those faces in the glass. Not clearly, not as features, but as presence. They watch with calm understanding. Neither jealous nor proud. They know what you know, that every reflection is temporary. And that's what makes it precious. It's strange how quiet the world becomes once you realize that every mirror is both a window and a memory. Each one shows not only who you are, but who you come from. A long line of dreamers, painters, chemists, and believers, each reaching, in their own way, toward a beauty that could never be held. And when you think of them, the women of marble corridors, the men bent over pigments and powders, they do not feel distant anymore. They seem to hover just outside of time, their gestures slow, their eyes full of patience. You can almost imagine them pausing in their work to look at you, not with accusation, not with envy, but with a faint understanding smile. It is the smile of people who have already learned that everything beautiful must someday become ordinary again, and that this is not tragedy but peace. The Renaissance was never only about art or discovery. It was about attention, the careful noticing of light on a surface, of color on skin, of the way a moment could be stretched until it shimmered. And that habit of noticing, that reverence for detail, still moves quietly through the world. Each time someone adjusts a lamp to make a shadow fall just right, each time a person pauses to watch dust floating in sunlight, a small echo of that same spirit awakens. Perhaps that is what we really inherit from them. Not their formulas or portraits, but their patience. Their belief that care itself could hold the chaos of existence still, if only for a few breaths. If you listen closely now, you can almost hear that rhythm again. The turning of glass, the whisper of fabric, the quiet scrape of a brush against skin. It is steady, unhurried, almost like breathing. The sound of centuries, exhaling together. Outside, the world keeps its pace. Winds shift, seasons fold into each other, and the cities they built sink softly into the layers of their own dust. But beneath all that movement, something continues. The simple wish to be remembered kindly, to leave behind more grace than harm. Tot fin nu kriup, to be, for a short while, luminous. You can see it everywhere, if you know where to look. In the way light collects on the rim of a glass, in the hush that follows music, in the faint reflection of your own face in the darkened window at night. It is not grandeur that survives, but gentleness, the smallest traces of care outlasting every empire. And in that thought there is comfort. because it means that none of it was wasted. Not the powders mixed in secret. Not the portraits painted in dim rooms. Not the hours spent perfecting what could never stay perfect. Each effort was a thread in a fabric far larger than its maker. A quiet contribution to the long human attempt at tenderness. The mirror was never truly about vanity. It was about wonder, the astonishment of seeing oneself as both real and fleeting. Even now, that astonishment lingers. Every reflection carries it. Soft as breath, constant as heartbeat, time smooths the edges of memory. But the essence of it, the simple, wordless awe at being alive and temporary, remains unchanged. It hums beneath the stillness of every painting, beneath the dust of every century, beneath this very silence now. So let it hum, let it soften into quiet. Let the centuries fade behind closed eyes until there is only warmth and the faint shimmer of a world that once tried endlessly to make beauty last. It becomes harder to tell where history ends and dreaming begins. The scenes blur together, a flicker of gold, a breath of dust, the soft echo of footsteps down a marble hall. Every century feels the same in the dark. You can almost feel the air of those vanished rooms, dry from the candles, heavy with perfume and silence. It settles on your skin like memory, not heavy, just present. The longer you linger with these ghosts, the gentler they become. They are no longer queens or alchemists or servants. They are simply people who once waited for the light to change, who once touched their own faces and wondered if the world would ever see them as they wished to be seen. That question is older than the word beauty itself. And perhaps this is why the story never truly ends. Because as long as there are mirrors, there will be that same moment. The breath before recognition, the small tilt of the head, the private pause in which a person becomes both observer and observed. It's such a fragile magic, and yet it has outlived everything else. If you were to walk now through the ruins of their cities, through the empty courtyards and faded frescoes, you would still find pieces of that pursuit hiding in the cracks. A flake of lapis blue on a forgotten wall, a comb carved from ivory, worn smooth by hands centuries gone, a glass shard that once belonged to a mirror. Hold it to the light, and it would still catch your reflection. Even time cannot take that from it. In the end, every civilization leaves behind the same traces: music too faint to hear, dust too fine to hold, and the marks of fingers that once shaped the visible world into something almost divine. We find those marks, and for a heartbeat, we recognize ourselves in them. The gesture repeats, one generation learning the same lesson the last one forgot. That beauty is not a possession, but a passing of light. So, let the light pass. Let it drift from portrait to portrait, from mirror to mirror, to mirror, to mirror abyss to fonsam, from one resting face to another. Let it fade softly, as candlelight fades when the wick has nothing left to give. The glow remains for a moment longer, suspended in air, then folds gently into shadow. In that shadow, everything is forgiven, the vanity, the pride, the hunger for perfection. All that remains is the quiet intention behind it, the wish to make something lovely before the dark returns. And that wish, small as it seems, is what keeps the world gentle. Now imagine the last workshop closing for the night. The apothecary covers his flasks, the painter wipes his hands. The city hums one final time, and then the sound thins out like silk. What's left is stillness, the kind that hums at the edge of sleep. You can feel it settling through the centuries, the same hush that falls across your own room now. The candlelight fades. The reflections fade with it. But the warmth stays. It always does. Somewhere a clock ticks, but its sound feels softened by distance. It could be the clock of your own room, or one that still hangs in some forgotten palace, marking hours that no longer belong to anyone. Time moves, but slowly now, as if reluctant to disturb the calm it has created. The air grows heavy with quiet. Every sound turns into memory. The murmur of a crowd in a painted hall, the brush of fabric against stone, the faint clink of glass being set upon a table. They fade one by one, until only breath remains. You can almost imagine the portraits themselves exhaling, the paint relaxing after centuries of tension, eyes that have watched too long finally allowed to close. Their faces, once stiff with grace, now seem softer, warmer, as if they too have earned their rest. In this half-light, the boundaries blur. You are no longer only a listener. You are part of that same slow current, drifting between memory and sleep. The world of marble and candlelight folds itself around you, not as history, but as atmosphere, a quiet reminder that every age, no matter how grand or distant, was once simply alive. Somewhere, a curtain stirs. A window breathes. The scent of wax and rose water lingers for a heartbeat longer. Then even that too begins to fade. If there is a lesson left, it is a small one. When that nothing we touch ever truly disappears. It only changes form. The gestures of care, the patience of creation, the fragile reaching toward beauty, they linger in every reflection, in every quiet moment like this. So you can let go now. The mirrors will keep their watch. The stories will remain where they are, folded gently inside the centuries, whispering in the stillness, weightless as dust, enduring as light. The silence deepens. It stretches wide and slow until even thought begins to settle. Each breath becomes quieter. Each heartbeat softer, softer. Each second longer than the one before. The world feels far away now. Distant, harmless, almost kind. You are surrounded by centuries of quiet, by the hush of marble rooms, by the slow rhythm of old dreams, still drifting. And somewhere between those dreams and this moment, you find yourself fading too, not disappearing, just joining the calm. Everything you've heard, everything that has lived and vanished, melts into the same quiet shimmer, a warmth that needs no witness, a story that asks for nothing more. The light dims, the last reflection fades, and what remains is peace. If you enjoyed drifting through history tonight, consider subscribing before you fall asleep. It helps this little corner of the internet keep growing, one quiet story at a time. And if you're still awake, leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from. I love seeing the map fill up with night owls. Sleep well and good night.